Pearson Sharp.
When you live in California, it is simply amazing how much of your life involves getting around how crazy California is. I am a big car nerd. I love cars. I have since I was a little kid. Years ago, I bought a little BMW Roadster, a Z4M. Got the inline six, the bulletproof S54 motor straight from the legendary E46 M3. 6-speed manual, naturally aspirated, individual throttle bodies, high revving, 8,000 RPM gem of a motor. Yeah. Arguably the best engine BMW ever made. Maybe one of the greatest engines of all time. Why am I talking about this? Because I truly love cars. I love driving. I love hearing the engine scream right before you shift. It's a guttural, primitive, human connection to this glorious machine that's more a work of art than a simple piece of automotive design. I love cars, and yet I live in a state that hates them. And California doesn't just hate cars. It's doing everything it can to wipe them out and eliminate them altogether. Despite everything wrong with the state right now, every time you hit the road, it feels like punishing you for driving is their #1 goal. Cars aren't meant to just take you from one place to another. They're meant to move you. And not just your body, but your soul. That's the difference between driving and transportation. So it's no surprise then that directly thanks to Gavin Newsom's insane anti-car, anti-consumer, anti-voter, and anti-American policies, gas prices are set to go through the roof again. Best estimates have prices blowing through $6 a gallon by this summer. And it's not just supply and demand. Newsom's crackdown on oil refineries is behind the latest surge, potentially over $9 a gallon in some places. And why is that? Because we're shutting down all our friggin' refineries. That's why. Democrats and the liberal elites can't stand cheap energy. That's a critical component of a healthy and free society. So naturally, driving up energy costs is their top priority. You make energy unaffordable, you keep people locked down. And we know how much liberals love lockdowns. So the California Energy Commission is warning that refinery capacity is shrinking fast, all because new environmental rules are pushing out traditional fuel producers. Just since 2020, California has lost more than 10% of its in-state oil refining ability. And that's not because of market collapse or lack of demand, it's policy. Starting in 2025, the state is rolling out strict new limits on emissions from refineries, forcing operators to either shut down or spend hundreds of millions of dollars to retrofit their equipment. Gee, I wonder what they're gonna do. Several facilities have already announced closures. Shocker. One of the biggest, the Phillips 66 refinery in Rodeo, is converting to biofuels. Others are shutting down entirely. All of this is happening while California still relies on gasoline for more than 90% of its vehicle transportation. What do these hippies think is going to happen? EV sales may be growing, but they still only represent 25% of car sales in the state, and a far smaller share of cars actually on the road. And EVs can't begin to compete with old school diesel semi-trucks for transporting goods. How is Pelosi supposed to get her Gucci ice cream when all the EV semis are stuck waiting to charge?
This is chocolate, and then we have some other chocolate here. We just got to restock the ice cream.
So what happens when the supply of fuel drops and the demand stays the same? Prices explode. Some analysts say prices will spike between $7 and $9 per gallon within the next year if more refineries shut down. And who wants to take bets on whether or not that happens? The Newsom administration insists this is all part of a transition to clean energy. But this is nothing more than a manufactured crisis, like all of their crises, designed to make gas be so expensive that drivers have no choice but to switch to electric vehicles. And while they're pouring all this effort and attention and money into railroading us, California still has a $20 billion hole in the budget. Hell, Newsom had to borrow $6 billion last month just to pay for healthcare for illegals. The economy is buckling under inflation. Homelessness is surging and crime is rising in major cities. And yet, Sacramento is focused on banning gas-powered cars, something we actually need and want. Some of these Democrats have gone so far off the reservation, they're pushing to decriminalize welfare fraud under $25,000. No wonder the state's broke. Meanwhile, in totally unrelated news, nearly half of California voters say in the next election, they're considering voting for a Republican governor. That should tell you everything you need to know about where this state is headed. And this isn't just happening in California. Biden's EPA added new tailpipe emission rules that effectively require 2/3 of all new vehicles sold by 2032 to be electric. That comes on top of federal subsidies for EVs, strict emissions caps, and growing limits on internal combustion engine production. President Trump is pushing back on all of these radical regulations, but we've seen how the judges are. They aren't going down without a fight. And of course, there's another problem. The EV infrastructure isn't ready. In fact, in many places, it doesn't even exist, especially not here in California. A report from JD Power found that 1 in 5 charging stations in the US doesn't even work. And for people in rural areas, it's a total no-go, pun intended. The electric grid itself is severely restrained. We get regular rolling blackouts here in California, and I've heard it's happening in Texas too. Meanwhile, the average cost of a new EV is around $53,000. That's well out of reach for many working class Americans. And for all the talk of saving the environment, the US is still importing hundreds of millions of barrels each year from countries like Saudi Arabia and Venezuela. So if the goal is true energy independence, these policies are doing the exact opposite, to say nothing of the environmental catastrophe involved in mining rare earth elements to make the batteries for these cars. Just building a single battery for an EV causes more emissions pollution than a gas-powered car does in 15 years of driving. And that doesn't take into account what you do with the battery once it's all used up. You think nuclear waste is bad? Try getting rid of a battery. All of that is to say, basically, they don't want us driving. In Europe, governments are already piloting programs to limit how far people can drive using so-called 15-minute city plans. Democrats and socialists here in America are slavering at the idea, pushing for similar concepts in Portland, New York, and yes, San Diego. And in California, new urban development plans tie housing approval to proximity to transit, not parking availability. The message is clear. If you want to live here, you better stop driving. Gas prices, EV mandates, zoning laws, and environmental regulations may seem like separate issues, but they all point in the same direction. Fewer cars, fewer drivers, and more top-down control over how Americans live and move. Even the California Legislative Analyst's Office warns the state's climate goals are headed for supply disruptions and economic disaster if we're not careful. But when has doing something stupid ever stopped Newsom? California is still pushing measures that restrict traditional energy without taking any steps to make sure alternatives are ready or affordable, including shutting down our nuclear plants as fast as possible with nothing to replace that lost energy. According to the U.S. Energy Information Administration, California already has the highest gas taxes in the nation, over $1.50 a gallon. Combine that with the refineries that are shutting down, and you're looking at an energy crisis created by the Democrats. This is not about clean energy. If it were, we'd be investing in nuclear power, expanding refinery efficiency, and giving consumers real choices. Instead, glubzunks like Gavin Newsom are creating scarcity, raising costs, and punishing working people for not being able to afford the state's forced transition. And make no mistake, this is a test run for the rest of the country. If these policies go unchecked in California, they will spread. States like Washington and New York are already drafting similar restrictions, to say nothing of the upcoming mileage tax for every mile you drive. I should just sell my Z and buy a horse. It'd actually be cheaper at this point. The World Economic Forum and other global institutions are openly pushing for reduced personal vehicle use worldwide. And that's no secret. They brag about it every chance they get. Well, California is the test bed. And if we don't hit the brakes on this fast, this whole country is gonna run out of gas. That's my take. What do you think? Am I making a big deal out of nothing? Or do you think that Gavin Newsom is driving us off a cliff? Let me know in the comments below. Until next time, stay safe, keep driving, and go with God.